Greetings and salutations, YouTube. This is your good friend, Fragments of Memory, also known as the Armchair Philosopher. Well, today we're going to talk about sex. And you're wondering why I'm holding up a Bible while I'm going to talk about sex. Well, this is my relationship to sex. And no, it won't be graphic, but I may say some things that might offend certain sensibilities. But this is just me being somewhat candid. This right here, of course, is a King James Bible. Little background about me: I came from a Protestant evangelical African American church, or in layman's terms, the black church. Now, Matthew chapter 5. This is around Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, verse 27 and 28, it says, Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Well, the reason I brought up that verse, let me sit there right there. The reason I brought up that verse is because growing up in church, I was taught that God is watching everything you do. I was also taught that Jesus died on the cross for your sins and rose again on the third day and sits at the right hand of the Father. And if I accepted that, I'd be saved. That was what I was taught as a young boy. Now, this deals with sexuality because as a little kid, no big deal. But when I'm 11, 12, and 13 and going through puberty, it's a bigger deal. And I noticed that the young ladies are also going through puberty, where they're developing the hips, the curves, the breasts, the thighs. And I notice, as does every other guy. Now, in addition to having those sexual feelings and those sexual urges and impulses, I was still wanting to go to church and be saved, quote unquote. So I had to wrestle with the whole my religion versus my libido, my sexual urges versus my devotion. And they seem to always be in this sort of Mortal Kombat death match, winner says finish him and rips out your entrails type of deal. Because I went to school with these women every day, these young ladies every day. In addition to that, I went to church every Sunday, so that was something interesting. And then, of course, what do young boys do when they're alone and don't have a girlfriend and don't know about sex? They watch a little something called Cinemax After Dark, or Skinemax After Dark. And you know what all the young boys do when they watch Skinemax. And of course, that happened during the weekend, and I'd feel really guilty. So I'd have to go to church praying and repenting because I, I had that impure thought, or I was engaging in certain activities that I should not be engaging in. And this would lead to just me having this all out war. And of course, my mother back in the day listened to Christian radio like Charles Stanley and Chuck Swindoll and David Jeremiah and D. James Kennedy, and I think last name some guy called McGee. Anyway, I'd hear these sermons about Christianity, and I'd feel really convicted and go to church and just pray like, God forgive me because I looked at this girl or did whatever. And I also was and to this day, I consider myself to be somewhat eccentric, a little weird, a little strange. I wasn't like everyone else, and I'm still not in that regard. And a lot of times I was ostracized as a kid anyway. And sometimes people would do cruel things like, hey, my man, that girl like you over there. Why don't you go holler at her, dude? And of course, it was people who didn't know me. It was people who, or knew me superficially, but were trying to set me up for the okie doke, basically. And that made me very suspicious of women growing up. So I didn't really have my first girlfriend until I was about 17, just a few months shy of 18. Even women that liked me, I was suspicious, like, this girl's gonna play a trick on me. And then it didn't help that at that time, women also screamed to the top of their lungs, men are dogs, and, excuse my language, niggas ain't shit. And they were screaming that and screaming that and screaming that. But then they'd end up with the guy that they just said was a dog. Or they'd end up pregnant by him. There were a few girls in my school that were pregnant. Now, this doesn't mean I attack women that have had babies out of wedlock. I'm merely saying that those same girls that were shouting this. We're doing this over here. Um, and again, it was that classic example of wearing the cloak of respectability yet carrying out disrespectful things. And I noticed that a lot when it came to the ladies. So I was in confusion. I was like, I like a lot of science fiction, so I was like an android in a sci-fi story going, does not compute, confusion, circuitry blowing, and you see the sparks and the explosion. And that's how I was. I was confused. I was like, and it always seemed that most women didn't look at me. They looked at other guys anyway. So I was like, don't women don't like me. They seem to always seem to make fun of me, and so I was confused. I was just like, dang, I was just confused and conflicted in a lot of ways. Now, I don't, and people even for a while thought I was homosexual. Like they was like, you gay, you a fag, you a little fag, ain't you? You probably like dudes and all of this. I mean, people would just say this to me in my face, like, wow. And I'm someone that I'm someone that just I never liked people asking my business. And that was just something that I felt like, wow, you just all in my business. Number one, you asking if I'm a virgin, and then if I'm gay. So that really just confused me. And those same girls that says I'm not giving up my goodness to someone is the same girl that lays up with some dude. So I always found that strange and this weird conundrum. So I basically just had to just say this because I feel like for any young guys out there that might be virginal, might be alone and maybe young and just going through something, or just older and dealing with the BS of women as far as that goes. Just this is sort of my story about me and sexuality. Well, this is it for part one because this is a two-parter. So I'm gonna go do the second part. I'll just kick that over to you and let me know what you think. Later.